In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 192 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is making a positive difference. Our quote of the day comes to us from Mandy Hale. To make a difference in someone's life, you don't have to be brilliant, rich, or perfect. You just have to care. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. I'm both humbled and extremely excited to bring you today's episode. Although I only recently connected with our guest today, it feels like I've known him for so many years. Shola Richards is not only an excellent speaker, an incredibly talented author, but he's an even better person that is paying it forward by making a positive difference. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Shola, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to be here, man.
I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
Oh, man. I don't understand any other way to live besides bringing it. So I think it was Will Smith that said it. If you stay ready, then you don't have to get ready. So I'm just staying ready, man. I'm ready to bring it.
I love it. That's the best quote we've heard in a while. So as we spoke, and as I told you before we went live, the number one objective of our show is to both motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you had either a personal story or a challenging time in your life that really tested you and you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Oh, yeah. So many. I'll probably share, so many to choose from. You know what? I'll choose the most harrowing one, the one that was really most challenging for me. So 14 years ago, I was working in an extremely toxic work environment. It can only be described as soul destroying. And I'm not even using that like euphemistically. Like, it was one of the worst workplace scenarios I've ever been in my life. And I worked there for 2 years, and I ended up falling into a pretty deep depression, and not just like sadness. I'm talking deep, debilitating depression where I couldn't even do anything, get out of bed. And one morning, I'll never forget, I decided that I was ready to quit, but on life itself. So speaking of the No Quit podcast, No Quit Living, I was actually ready to literally quit living. So I made a decision that I was going to end my own life because of how badly I was treated, and just I could not see any way out. And I was, just before I was about to turn 30, and I couldn't picture the next 30 years being like this. So I made a decision. I live in Los Angeles, and I was going to drive down the 405 freeway and drive my car off the overpass to make it look like an accident. And I actually attempted it. I actually tried. And thankfully, I got kind of my wits about me, pulled back onto the freeway. And in that moment, I realized like I almost quit on life and on everything that mattered to me. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more transformative than being in a moment where you are not physically dead, but emotionally dead inside, and realizing that there's so much more that I need to do. And I'm so thankful that my attempt to quit did not come to fruition. But what had happened is it sparked something in me that created this really powerful resolve that I was like, man, no matter what, I am not going to allow this to be the way that my story ends. So I went into my workplace. I promptly handed in my resignation, and I literally was like, I cannot be the only person dealing with this. And spent few months looking online, trying to discover workplace toxicity and workplace bullying and learn more about it, and come to find out 65 million Americans are on the wrong side of being destroyed at work. And I'm like, dude, why in the world is no one doing something about this? And one of my buddies like, well, hey man, you're someone. Why don't you do something about it? I'm like, well, why would anyone listen to me? I'm like, well, let's figure it out. And for the past decade or so, that's what I've been dedicating my life to, and helping other people who are on the verge of quitting, not just their job, mind you, but their lives due to the toxicity that they're dealing with at work, creating alternative solutions, and most importantly, ending this suffering, professional suffering that's been going on for generations based on how we treat each other. So my goal now is to make sure people have safe and healthy work environments. And I will never quit on that for as long as I live.
I can't thank you enough for being transparent with your story, and I think it's amazing. And the reason I say it's amazing is not the story in itself. I can't talk about the specifics of not having understood what you're going through, but I'm talking about it's amazing that you're doing something about it, because I find in today's day and age, so many people talk about doing things. So many people think about, well, if this was here, if that was there. So I want to commend you for taking that first step, and like you said, 10 years later, you're now somewhere different, and you did something about it. So with that in mind, just wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind just quickly telling our listeners a little bit about what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. And first of all, thanks for the kudos on that. I appreciate it. So these days, I'm an author. I wrote 2 books. The first one's called Making Work Work. That is where really I took all the information that I've learned through the past 10 years and put it into a really comprehensive guide to help people through toxic work environments. And secondly, my newest book, Go Together, around this concept called Ubuntu. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But I also am a keynote speaker. So I do a lot of speaking and traveling around the country to large audiences around creating cohesive and healthy work environments and really eradicating bullying in any form. So that's my passion. And I now travel the country, the world, and helping people to reclaim their work lives and really reclaim their personal power and be more accountable to themselves. And that's really the word. The word accountability is really big in the work that I do.
I didn't even share this with you before we went live, but we have a clothing line here at No Quit Living, and on the back of all of our clothes is the hashtag accountability. So we'll touch on that in a minute. But the reason I actually reached out to you was your book Go Together is unbelievable, and I don't say that just because you're here, but the whole concept of Ubuntu, I wanted to just touch on it for a second, but in the introduction, you have a quote, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I know it's an African proverb, but just wanted to kind of ask you, the whole Ubuntu concept, how did you get into it? If you wouldn't mind just very briefly telling our listeners a teeny bit about it.
Yeah, so my dad is from West Africa, and sadly, he just passed away last month. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you for that. And missed him terribly. But his legacy was really around this quote: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the concept behind this is that we cannot do anything meaningful alone. And I think someone once brought this up, and it's so true. The reason why they put prisoners, really bad prisoners, in solitary confinement is because that is the easiest way to weaken another person, is to isolate them from others and make sure they can't have that connection. So for us, when we isolate ourselves by either just putting on headphones and walking through the world completely as a zombie and disconnected from each other, we're also at a weakened state as well. But this idea of Ubuntu is meant and is translated to mean I am because we are. So what if we looked at every way that we could reconnect ourselves at work and how we live, with our romantic partners, with our colleagues, with our bosses, with our neighbors and strangers? It literally can change how we see the world. And that's what I wrote about in this book.
No, you can see it throughout the book, and you can feel how much it means to you. But again, going back to what I said before, is you're doing something about it, which is awesome. Wanted to just take a minute to change lanes for a second here. And I wanted to ask you, how do you define success, or what does success look like to you?
Oh, man. Success for me is freedom. And I'll explain what I mean. I've always thought of, I see a lot of people who, or maybe I'll take it a step further, I'll say fulfillment. And the reason why I see a lot of people who are driven towards success as a goal. And that always scares me because I know a ton of unhappy, successful people. I really do. I do not know one unhappy, fulfilled person. And by fulfilled, it's like everything's in alignment. Like you're getting the most out of your personal relationships, you're getting the most out of your professional relationships. You're doing what you want, when you want to do it, and with who you want to do it with. And also, too, maybe most importantly, is there's this feeling that you're making an impact on the world that is meaningful and long lasting. And that's where I get fulfillment from. So I used to be a guy who would chase money, and it was kind of funny because the more I chased it, the more it ran away from me. So it was like, what I found was that, and this is something that's changed my life when I understood this, money can never be the goal. Money has to be the reward that you get for hitting the goal. So when your goal is something like impacting the world and helping as many people as possible to live healthy, happy work lives, it's amazing how financial freedom and all the other fulfillment aspects of it change everything. And having partners and people who you surround yourself who support you and love you and understand your vision is equally important to that idea of success and fulfillment.
It's interesting that you touch on that, because I think so many people tie success to a monetary goal or to a house or to a car or to those things. And don't get me wrong, I think it's important to be able to obviously provide. But when you said the word freedom, that's been said a lot. But when you took it to the next level and you discussed the whole fulfillment concept, I think that's really important, because I truly believe that if you go about doing the right things each and every day, and if you really want to help people, eventually it comes back to you tenfold. And I don't mean just monetary wise, but if you go about making a difference, and the word you touched on for a second is having an impact, I think that's so powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, think about what you've done with the No Quit Living podcast, right? I mean, you're helping so many people who are struggling with the idea of maybe they're feeling like, I can't go on, or it's really hard. And talking to all these different folks who are doing whatever they're doing in the world to make an impact, you're also helping folks like your listeners be able to realize, like, hey, I'm no different from this guy, I'm no different from this lady. I can do the same thing too. And I'm hopeful that through the stories that you share in your podcast and what I'm sharing on this particular episode will help anyone else who's struggling in some way realize that this does not have to be the end of your story.
You know what? I love what you just said at the end, is this does not have to be the end of your story. And I've been fortunate to have some amazing guests on my show, and they've shared different stories from all different walks of life. But so many people have touched upon the fact is that you can change, fill in the blank. It could be life, could be a marriage, could be a relationship, could be a job, could be a passion. And I think the reality is that that's what we stand for here at No Quit Living, is just to motivate people and inspire them to never give up. And I wanted to ask you maybe an interesting question is, if you had to define yourself in just one word, what would that word be?
Kind. I'm a kind guy. Kindness is my number one value. So I think what's so tough in this line of work, because folks are really into this whole idea about, I'm tough and I'm gritty and all that type of stuff, which is all awesome, by the way, don't get me wrong, but I'm kind. I really do care about other people. But the thing that I have to spend a quick minute just dispelling is the idea between kind and nice. And people get those two confused so often. And kind and nice have very little in common. And nice is, the difference between kind and nice is really about depth, right? So nice is super surface level, whereas kind is deeper. I mean, seriously, some of the worst people on earth are nice. Even like serial killers can be nice, for crying out loud. That's how they get you in the car, right? I mean, it's like, but they're not kind. Kind is like, what will I do to be able to support someone who is struggling, right? What will I do to make sure that people who are really struggling with, let's say, for example, I think my kids, I have two young daughters, right? And sometimes they don't want, you have young kids too, so you get this, like the idea of just trying to help them through the daily struggles of like just simply brushing their teeth at night. Or if I was being nice, like, oh, they don't want to brush their teeth. Okay, whatever you want, honey. Like kind is like, no, you're going to do this because I want to make sure that you're the best human being that you can possibly be. Or they'd be having Pez for dinner every night if I was being nice. So it's like, how do you figure out being kind? And if someone describes me, they're like, hey, dude, doesn't matter if you see him on the basketball court, doesn't matter if you see him in the mall or a speaking engagement on a podcast, you're going to get the same dude because he's just a kind-hearted dude.
No, I'm so glad you briefly touched on that, because I was just reading something last week that was talking almost identically to the verbatim word you use, which is surface level versus much deeper. And don't get me wrong, and I don't want anybody to think that it's not good to be nice, but it's good to be
Right.
kind as well. But it just takes it to a whole new level. And I think how you tied it to the serial killer was an interesting analogy. So I'll give you props for that.
Just came to me at the top of my head, so I forgot to go with it.
One of the things we often touch on is the importance of a morning routine, and I was curious if you have a morning routine that you swear by.
Yeah, so I do actually. I gosh, you got to win the first like 5-10 minutes of the day, or really the first hour, one would argue. And but for me, I am big on the most important words you'll ever say are the words that you say about yourself to yourself. Or sorry, let me say it again. The words that you say to yourself about yourself. And I think oftentimes I've been prone to not be very kind to myself, and I've been prone to really suffer from something. I wrote about this in Go Together, about suffering from the imposter syndrome, where I struggle with the idea of like, oh my gosh, it's another day where no one found out that I don't know anything around here. So it's like I struggle with that some days. So to counteract that, I spend the first 5 to 10 minutes really just starting my day with self kindness and self compassion. And coincidentally, there's some research out of Cleveland Clinic that said that we as human beings think 60,000 thoughts a day, 95% of which are the exact same thoughts that we thought yesterday. And if that's not scary, what's worse is 80% of those thoughts are usually negative. So we have to take real active attention towards the words that we say to ourselves. So every morning, I wake up and I say everything that I want and desire in my life comes to me easily and effortlessly. Now, I say this not because I'm sitting back and just waiting for things to flow to me, but I want to make sure that I'm in a place of flow, the zone. I think about this often, like when you see basketball players that are just, or any athlete for that matter, who's just in a place of just flow. What ends up happening is things that are harder for most folks come easily to them. And I want to remind myself every day that I don't have to struggle to do this. I can be able to put myself my best foot forward and find a place of flow. So every morning I start with that. It's like a meditative practice that I do, that allows me to start my morning off on the right foot, and my days seem to follow suit.
You know, I love that you touch on that, because in essence it's the concept of affirmations and the importance of self-talk. And I think the statistics you shared were pretty staggering, of all those thoughts, 95% of them being the same as the day prior. But the interesting thing is the next one you shared, which is 80% of them are negative. And I think that's
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing for me, that I'm studying the concept of affirmations and positive self-talk, and I talk about
Oh,
it
good.
with my kids quite often. But I also talk about it with people on my team when I do speak engagements, and we touch on it quite often on the show, is the concept of affirmations. And I think it's so important to start your day off that way. And like you said, you win the first 5 or 10 minutes. And I think in today's day and age with technology, unfortunately, so many people, they pick up their phone nonstop. And I know some friends of mine, that literally are on Instagram nonstop or Facebook nonstop.
Oh,
And don't get me
geez.
wrong, I'm not saying that I don't do it myself, but I've been trying to make a conscious effort of reconnecting with real life, in person conversations, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with emails and texts and things, but for me it's the
Sure.
importance of really connecting. One of the quotes on your book that I absolutely love, just want to just touch on it for 1 second, is it's by Dr. Wayne Dyer, is everything that you are against weakens you, everything you are for empowers you. Just wanted to kind of ask you why you put that one in, and what it means to you.
I think about this so often. It's like, so many people are anti things. I'm against this. I'm against that. And I find that what it ends up happening is that truly does weaken your resolve when you're full. And because it's like the whole idea versus like light versus dark, right? So darkness technically isn't a concept, it's just the absence of light. So if you're focusing on what you're against, you're focusing on something that is already just disempowering you by the nature that you're against it. Versus when you're for something, like I'm not anti-bullying, I'm for healthy, safe, collaborative workplaces. And what this does is it helps people to understand, like, if I'm fighting against something, I always need to wake up with a villain in mind, like my teeth gritted, like, like, I don't know. Eventually this is kind of not motivating or empowering, or I think about, someone once said this, like, I think, because I know we're both basketball guys, when Michael Jordan was in the late 80s, was getting destroyed by the Detroit Pistons on a regular basis, and the Pistons won championships in 88 and 89. What happened was he was waking up like, I got to beat the Pistons, got to beat the Pistons. How do I beat the Pistons? And then Phil Jackson came along, and his coach, starting in 1990, if I remember correctly, and he was like, instead of worrying about the Pistons, why don't you just focus on becoming a champion? And that mind shift for him changed everything. It's like, and he remember saying this in an interview, like, I want to focus on how do I become a champion versus I got to beat the Pistons. Same idea with anything, right? Oh man, I got to get rid of these pounds, like, or these extra pounds, or I got to do this. Like, I gave up drinking soda 4 years ago. I used to drink 5 sodas a day, which is outrageous. I don't touch the stuff anymore because I was like, instead of like, I got to get rid of soda, I was more like, how do I become the healthiest version of myself? How do I make sure that I'm showing up as the best version of myself? And you change the questions you ask yourself, you get better answers. So when I think about Wayne Dyer's quote, I'm always like, what can I be for? Because once I'm focused on being for something, I automatically get stronger. But when I focus on being against something, it always makes me weaker in some way.
Zig Ziglar, who I know you know of, and an amazing speaker, he had something very similar. He said is the concept of, instead of rooting against a team or instead of rooting against a politician, be in favor of the other person or the other team. And I think that's the biggest thing as a country. We have a disconnect, and I'm not in any way pro Trump or pro Hillary Clinton or pro anything in that regard. But what I always find interesting is, and I think it's unfortunately where our country is right now, is we all want to hate first. And we all, like you said, you want to be against or anti. So if you were a Hillary Clinton supporter, instead of being anti-Trump, why don't you be Hillary Clinton supporter, and vice versa? If you think Donald Trump is better for different reasons, don't go about hating Hillary. Why don't you say, hey, these are the reasons why I think my candidate or my team. And I'm really glad you touched on it. I gave up soda myself. The last soda I had was December 31st, 2016. I think I had like 12 that day, but
it's crazy, man. That's the last day that mine was December 31st, 2014. That's amazing. What are the odds of that? That's nuts.
That's awesome, dude. So wanted to ask you maybe an interesting question. Want to get your perspective is, if you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh my God. This is so easy. Start now. Well, two things. Well, I guess kind of a start now and believe in yourself. And I feel that my 20-year-old self was always thinking like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to be an author. I was a bookworm. I mean, after I left basketball practice, I went to Barnes and Noble and I just sat there and just read Tony Robbins and like Wayne Dyer and Jan Van Zandt and, Jack Canfield and I'm a big reader. So like I was like, there's no way I could ever do this. And I spent so much time just talking myself out of why I could do anything. If I could, as a 44-year-old man, as I'm talking to you right now, Chris, and go back to my 20-year-old self, I'd be like, man, you are more ready than you believe you are. Just don't let your self-doubt overwhelm you, because here's the secret, young Shola. Everyone out there has self-doubt. You're not the only one. Because I actually thought I was. And that's what really crippled me and stopped me from doing what I need to do.
No, everybody does, and that's one of the challenges with social media today. Is a lot of people want to put the amazing things out there. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think a lot of times people hide from some of those things, and we don't know that others are vulnerable. Other people have fear or self-doubt. So I'm glad you touched on that. Now, if you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Obviously, with my dad passing, that would be an obvious answer. So I'll let that one pass, because I'll come up with a different one, because I always would. One dinner with him would want to be many, many others. So I will. Outside of my dad, this is a little bit off the beaten path. I would actually choose Kobe Bryant. former Lakers superstar, now Oscar Award winner. The reason why I would choose him is living in LA and getting to watch a lot of Laker games and really see his mentality. I have not met an athlete or seen an athlete or a person, period, with a level of drive that he had. I'd want to know what keeps him going. How is he able to be so intrinsically motivated in a situation where he had, after he had his legal troubles when he was on trial for attempted rape or whatever it was back in like mid 2000s. It was interesting to see how he was able to shift his mentality to be able to be in a position where he could just be focused on the sport. And when the charges were dropped and he had to figure out like his new mentality and how to just figure out how to be successful, it was amazing watching how he could just compartmentalize the haters that were coming at him and still perform at a high level, how he was able to overcome injuries and every single setback to lead his team to 5 championships. And I've never seen someone so be able to deal with haters and naysayers as well as him. And I'd love to just ask him, like, how are you able to stay so locked in? I mean, he would get up, he'd come to practice 2 hours before everyone else and stay 2 hours after and still be the first guy at the gym for the games every day and put up 40 points without even trying. Like, how did he always have that drive? And I would love to be able to tap into that and learn more about how he has that Mamba mentality, as they call it out here in LA.
Have you read his new book?
No, actually, I have not. And I was, it's funny because that's what I love to do is read. And someone once mentioned to me, like, have you read his book? Like, no, I haven't. So that's my reminder. Got to get that on the queue.
Speaking of books, wanted to ask you if there's anything that you've read recently or something you're reading right now that you'd like to share or recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, there's gosh. So I'm in my office right now. I'm looking at my bookshelf, and there's so many. When I think of the folks who would be tuning into the No Quit Living podcast, probably one of my all-time favorite books, which really flows into the purpose of the podcast, the book by Ryan Holiday called "The Obstacle Is the Way." And I don't know if you've ever heard this book before. It's phenomenal, and I love Ryan Holiday's writing. It's very real, very engaging, as he's a great storyteller and he's able to bring in different stories, and also around these ideas of like, right when you're thinking you're ready to quit, it's like maybe that obstacle that's in your way is the way. It's part of the path. Equally as important too, one of my all-time favorite books for folks who are creative, especially when they're struggling, is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I cannot say enough about this book. Both my books would not be written if it was not for that book. When I was struggling creatively and trying to figure out how to keep this thing moving, someone gave me this book, and I am so deeply grateful for it. It is one of the most powerful books I've ever read, and it's easy to read. It's short, and it is absolutely, well, when you think about quitting along the way, that will change you for sure.
No, I appreciate those recommendations. I've not read the second. The first one I have is one of the things that we notice, and you and I connected on social media, but we're able to see people and we're able to follow people, and some of them are famous for different reasons. But I was curious if there's anybody famous that you look up to, and if so, why?
It's interesting. So I'm odd in the sense that I'm so focused on just trying to be like the best version of myself, and I often look at folks who are famous, but I don't always like follow them deeply. Sometimes I look at what they're doing from afar. This is kind of cliched, but it's really a simple one. Is I look at someone like Oprah Winfrey, who's done so much for not just for the community, but also someone who was given nothing and built her empire from the ground up in terms of her impact, her ability to positively affect the world. And I always look at something like that as a positive example. But I also look at folks that may not be as well known when I'm thinking about people who are doing things. There's a guy who his name's Eric Thomas. He's E.T. the hip hop preacher. I don't know if you ever heard of this guy.
I love E.T. I have his audiobook, and I've tried to listen to it probably 5 or 6 times a year, and I think his videos are awesome.
Oh man, he's just he's next level. And I mean, I have his like mixtapes on my phone, so when I'm like working out, I can listen to him. But he's someone who also in this public speaking game, he is he's up there on that Rushmore right now, like some of the top 4 or 5 folks who are really impacting the world in terms of the spoken word. And I look at him as someone that I would like to aspire to in that level in terms of having more of a worldwide impact. I've had a lot of success in the country here, but I also want to start spreading it throughout the world. So he's someone who I definitely look to as a successful guy.
Are you a fan of David Goggins at all?
Oh, he's the Navy SEAL guy who ran.
Yeah, he's nuts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I saw. God, it's funny that you brought him up. I saw a video on YouTube with him, and I've never. This is the toughest human being on earth. I mean, this guy is so next level, but that goes back to what I'm saying. Like, I really feel like one of the most successful things that we can do to ensure success is our increasing our pain tolerance, being able to suffer. I mean, that sounds so not positive, but it really is, though. It's like, how do you allow yourself the space to suffer so that you can grow from that pain into something bigger and something better? And I feel like the easiest way to get better is to do more hard things. And as you do more hard things, you gain more self-esteem, more self-belief. And my man who ran that race, David Goggins, I can guarantee you, like, he's not afraid of having a difficult conversation with someone. He's not afraid of, like, passing on a donut that happens to be in the break room. Like, he's like, I've made tough decisions before, so I have enough self-esteem to be able to do it. And that's why guys like that and people like that are really inspiring to me.
No, both of those guys are absolutely amazing. So you knew I was gonna ask it, but going back to it, what does the word accountability mean to you?
Oh gosh, so this word just drives me, man. It's the way I define it is the ability to own your words, your actions, and your behavior. I mean, that's, you're not blaming others, making excuses and all that silly stuff that just gets in the way of being a fully actualized human being. I think what's tricky for some folks, at least when I teach it, responsibility and accountability often get confused. And I always think of responsibility as the thing that happens before the action. So let's say, for example, like, I'm responsible to give a speech next week on a college campus. So I'm responsible to make sure that the speech goes well, show up on time, all good stuff. Accountability is owning the outcome of what happened after it's done. So it's like, so let's say I get on stage, I either show up late or I bomb my speech. If I can be responsible for doing all those things, but am I accountable is what happens afterwards? Am I owning the fact, like, I should have showed up, or I should have been better practiced or better prepared, or whatever it may be? That's what accountability means to me. And it's funny because I talk a lot about it, and I always share this thing. If any of your listeners are struggling with someone in their life who is not accountable, who blames others and makes excuses, and I mean, but habitually, the one question I always give to a person who does this to get them back into accountability mindset is a very simple question, and feel free to steal it. The next time someone who is blaming others makes excuses, just look at them in the eye and just ask them this question. So what part of the situation do you own? And then just back away and have them look at that and realize that we're done with excuses. What part of the situation do you own? And then just be quiet. And usually magic ensues afterward.
I'm definitely going to trademark that before you get an opportunity to. No, that's great advice, and something that I think a lot of people do is, and John C. Maxwell, who was a mentor and somebody that I was coached and trained under,
nice.
he talks about asking great questions, and to get great answers, you got to ask great questions. So I think that's definitely one. So I wanted to ask you real quick is, What's the best way for our listeners to connect or follow you or get either of your books, which are Making Work Work, and again, the other one we spoke about quite often today, which is Go Together?
Yeah, so easiest way to connect with me is just go to my website, Shola Richards, SHOLA Richards, plural.com. And that has all my social media handles are on there and information for my books. I love connecting with folks. So, I mean, that's how we connected, Chris. So if anyone's out there and wants to shoot me an email, say hello, excuse me, please feel free to shoot me one. I'd love to connect in any way possible. So head over to my website, get my info, and shoot me an email.
That's awesome.
Find me online. Let's connect.
That's awesome. And then the last question for you is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Yeah. Geez. If you're listening right now and you're struggling in the workplace for whatever reason, because you're just simply wondering, like, why does this person have to be like this? Or why does people have to act like this? Why does work have to be so painful? There's a better way. And I promise you that in the work that I've already done and the books that I've written, but also work that's coming down the pike, hopefully will help to alleviate some of that pain for you. But I am here to support you in that way, whether it's a coaching relationship or via my books or through speaking engagements. So if you have a department or organization that needs some help in overcoming or reversing a toxic trend, hit me up. I'll go over there and change things around for you.
Shola, I truly, truly appreciate your time, and I would definitely recommend to our listeners to read Go Together. It's a fantastic book, but more importantly is the way that Shola and I connected was via social media. So if you're interested in learning about more about his books or any of his speaking or coaching, just please connect with him on social media. And thank you so much for being a guest on our show today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks again for having me, Chris, and everyone out there, don't quit.
Thank you for listening to episode number 192. Shola is quite an individual, and I really took a lot of information from today's interview. Shola briefly touched upon the difference of nice versus kind, and it's something that I think we should all take a moment to think about. Shola identified a problem that almost cost him his life, but he decided to make a positive difference for others. When I asked his definition of success, he used the word freedom, and then switched his answer to fulfillment. Shola also quickly mentioned that he knows a lot of people that are very successful but unhappy, but he doesn't know any unhappy, fulfilled people. The advice he would have shared with the 20-year-old version of himself was spot on. Start now and believe in yourself. So in conclusion, I would like to echo some of Shola's words today. We all have things, people, ideas, and or opportunities that we have thought about, dreamt of, or we've also possibly even said the words would have, could have, or should have. So right now, decide to be different. Start now and believe in yourself as you go for your greatness. Don't aim to just be nice. Decide to be kind and pay it forward today with the hope and objective of making or having a positive difference for someone else. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.